Thank you, Representative Steinberg and the Council of State Governments. The tradition of energy intelligence has started back since really the 70s, and I wanted to touch on what are some of the most timely topics for today. With the background and insights from overseas, the energy savings with the LEDs, the air conditioning, and then the hydrothermal carbonization, we're gonna also touch on jobs. So I think the J word has been underused in this current political conversation about the whole green economy and what can happen. Here's some background. University of Virginia first for me as an undergrad back in the 80s, followed by a master's at Penn as an architect. Running Independence LED now in the Energy Intelligence Center is an absolute honor, and serving on the Sustainable Business Network Board of Managers as a lead AP, and even the American LED Alliance. Feel like after 30 years I brought some knowledge that would be worthy of your attention today. You each have a book in front of you. Learn from Looking is 30 years of my travel drawings from around the world. It's probably a good 10,000 hours of illustrations and sketches from the Old Town Square at the center of Prague to the high-speed bullet train when I lived in Japan, including what's been done in the Yucatan all the way over to Budapest. Here is an example of what we've been doing with the lighting. So the 2010 story is moving Independence LED lighting from China with the manufacturing to southeastern Pennsylvania. So this is close to home for me. It's a decade now coming up on our innovation, and with projects that are basically taking 50% or higher as a bite out of the energy footprint. It was really an eye-opener for me coming out of grad school that buildings use about 40% of the US energy, and of that, 20+% is in the ceiling. And if we can cut it in half, the numbers unfold like this. 15 watts is a big difference from 32 watt fluorescent tubes. When you're over 50% savings, it's now about cost. How much is it up front? Well, if an installed project is, $16, which is in the 50 cent to $1 per square foot, but you're saving $8, now you're having a conversation about a 2-year payback, not a 7, not a 10-year payback. And it comes down to, in this example of a custom engineered tube for state corrections, sometimes riches in the niches. So this one happens to have no metal or glass, so it cannot be weaponized by inmates. This came from California as a request to have a weaponized free form of illumination. It's a micro example in the whole universe of thousands of products and the SKUs that we produce, whether it's Walter Reed Hospital and beating out companies like GE for that contract because we had them made in America, or 30 Navy ships. It's the Omni Hotel parking garage in New Haven, Representative. So it's really about looking at incrementally taking a bite out of that energy footprint, starting in many cases with the ceiling. When it comes to these other stories of lighting, the tipping point has happened. It's not about to come. So right around 2017, end of 16, we started seeing the real drop off with everything from the incandescent 60 watt bulbs that could now be replaced with 6 watts with LEDs. They were at the Home Depot for the first time in the big box stores. What we hadn't seen when I got started was basically anything other than a flashlight that had the LEDs in it at the big box. We had to educate customers, and in your case, decision makers, that would see the value. It wasn't some snake oil that could cut the energy in half. Now it's at least more about which lights to buy and where to buy from. This drop off that's interesting, where you don't see the cascade come for the fluorescent tubes the way it does for the incandescent socket bulbs, is because they may have some 20,000 hour life, and they could be in someone's laundry room at home for many, many more decades, depending on the use. There are also companies that make the ballast compatible LEDs that can fit into the existing ballast system, which also extends basically the component that starts those lights. When it comes to payback, people ask, well, what about, the efficiency is getting better and the cost is coming down. I say that's 100% true, but the acceleration has slowed, meaning the cost has dropped and dropped and dropped. At some point, you don't get a laptop for under $300. Like, no matter how good it is, it's not going to go much lower. You can spend several thousand, but the other thing with the efficiency is it's going to keep going up, but only incrementally. So now is really the time to dig in. Okay, mindset. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. We see that at the state level all the time. The lights are running. Why should I bother to change them? If we wait, the LEDs are getting cheaper and better. I just addressed that. And then if we don't have a budget, well, good news, the private sector is putting hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars towards initiatives where there's a zero upfront cost. So first with the solutions A, you have to accept that the maintenance and the labor cost to touch these lights is higher, and it's sometimes passive than you might know. It is rarely calculated to the full extent. When it comes to this request for proposals, you all can lead by example in your roles, and I think that the story becomes basically ask for the performance contracting. You do not need to wait for a budget to unfold to start doing practical things. I've here just included a few of the case studies, but the idea of correctional facilities and government hospitals, saving 53%, changing out the lights for a public safety firehouse or rescue centers. These are among a universe of case studies that exist, not for our company, but across the industry. So it's hard to make the case not to change the lights and get started. Same thing's true with schools, public, private sector, all across the board. Okay, let's switch to the controlled indoor agriculture. So the environment and the agriculture that we have often involves moving lettuce from California, many states, across thousands of miles. Like 90% of the vegetables in the United States come from California. This idea of a system that includes direct current, hydroponic, in some case aquaponic, also the LEDs if relevant, wind, solar, water collection, making a way to bring food closer to the table. The farm to table argument is on the table now with realistic math, where up until these past few years, the cost of the lighting, which is about 50% of the CapEx, was so high, and the burden of making that head of lettuce, producing it, like think of it as a little factory product, was not gonna match up against the migrant labor in the Central Valley of California and the diesel fuel to move it. Now that's changed. And the idea here of making Earth Day every day and growing superfoods is so real that down in Maryland, we have now converted, we're into our third one, the poultry buildings that are 500 feet long, 50 feet wide, into lettuce and basil farms, because the big Tyson and the Purdue said, we're only gonna buy under contract from big corporate farms, and the little family farmer that has a 20, 30,000 square foot building is left out of the contract. Empty buildings. It's not gonna become a blockbuster video rental, and it's not gonna become a little arcade in the middle of the eastern shore of Maryland. 3-some billion square feet of vacant real estate is on the table today out of 87 billion US non-residential. These aren't abandoned, these are just vacant for whatever reason. Converting on the East Coast, the eastern region of this council, can really take a leadership role because the jobs are in the millions to transfer how we make food for a growing population. Next one is the energy intelligence. This is a Northeast Corridor story coming out of technology originated with pilot projects in India. So the basic story, and we've talked about it earlier, was 40% of US energy is in buildings. Well, if air conditioning, not unlike lighting, is 20 to some 40%, let's take a look at the climate control. Now it looks like we can save some 15 to 40%, and these are based on, I'm gonna just give you the quick numbers, an algorithm that leaves the existing equipment in place. The cost to change chillers, evaporators, cooling towers is so high that the payback is often slower than solar. However, existing systems can be tuned, and the analogy is the air pressure on the tire of your car. If you micro change that within a couple PSI, you will have a slight increase of efficiency every little mile on the road. It's gonna be micro, but if that adds up into a hospital or a school, $3 or $4 a day for the cooling system, where the condenser water entry temperature is adjusted to meet the dew point and the humidity, it is literally that analogy of tuning the car. And it's 30, 40, 50, sometimes $100,000 a year just for these single standalone buildings. This is an example from over in the Middle East with the facility manager that wanted to turn the system off. Like an autopilot or a cruise control in your car, it can be set to watch it go on and off. It's really groundbreaking, although it's new to the US, has been used in India. And I love the story of mapping prior year in red And the good news is the very next year in 2012, the bill was lower by thousands of kWh every single day. That's the scorecard. Okay, when it comes to SOMAX and the bioenergy, we're going to talk about this and then I'll turn over the microphone. Here's the story with trash to treasure. Food waste can be used for fuel. We have a problem in the United States. Like 25% of all the food is thrown out or somehow discarded in transit. So it's the touching it from the farm to get it into the pickup truck. It's the kind of little things like the lettuce has an expiration date and wasn't sold at a Whole Foods by a certain date, and it's in dumpsters. I mean, unbelievable. Not leftovers that our kids we would hope would eat, you know, at the diner after a Sunday, sports event. Here's the interesting thing. If you can turn it under 400-degree temperature and about 3,000 PSI into hydrochar. So think of it as doing what the Earth did over 100 million years in a day. This is technology out of Germany. The hydrothermal carbonization is basically making the equivalent of what was a fossil fuel in a very accelerated period of time. It's human waste, it's bio waste, it's construction waste, anything that is organic. And what it yields with the hydrochar is the fuel to be able to gasify it and have the hydrogen to spin a turbine for electricity generation, the ability to drive vehicles. So this, with lighting and the food and basically the air conditioning, is the fourth piece of a story about now how we close the loop on basically a smarter ecosystem in the way we use fuel. And just to close with the jobs, this is not thousands of jobs, this is tens of thousands, if not millions on the East Coast alone. And this idea of combining something like the lighting, the air conditioning with the food waste to fuel is such an interesting proposition to me, because we can lead again by example. The people in this room have that ability. And I'm happy to field again, I think we left time at the end for the questions, and turn the microphone. But thank you for the audience today.